Welcome to Roundtable Radio. Through our conversations, we discover the holy in the ordinary, look for modes of grace and peace, and redefine what we're talking about. We talk about faith. Hey, Ed.
Hey, Leslie. How you doing?
Happy Holy Week.
Happy Holy Week. Blessings.
I always feel weird. Happy Holy Week?
I know. With strange phrases like Good Friday. And, it doesn't quite add up.
I saw something funny on social media that was like, it's Holy Moly Week.
Oh, there we are.
I was like, there you go. So we are getting through our 52 for the journey. You can see it here. You can grab one at your favorite bookshop, I think, maybe, or your least favorite bookshop. And it is week 21. We're in the Gospel of Mark, and it is the Easter story.
It is.
It is. So here we go. Mark 16, 1 through 8. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on, the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb?" When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. When they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place where they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's different than how I remember it.
It's a very unique interpretation of Easter expression. Yeah, you mean compared to other gospel stories? And
I mean, compared to my memory, which could be a conglomeration of all of the above. But
Well, this one stands out.
Yes.
For sure. And in fact, there are all kinds of interesting theories about why it ends the way that it does.
Okay.
It actually, in the Greek text, the last word in this story is the word for.
Oh.
F-O-R.
F-O-R.
It's like someone was writing this story and someone grabbed that person and whisked him away mid-sentence, and that was it.
He's like, yeah.
So there's one theory is actually that the ending of the gospel was ripped off, and that we have never recovered it. One of the things that happened is that other writers added to it. We know that.
Okay.
So in the oldest manuscripts of this text, it ends like this, like the version that you used. In later versions, there were additions. It's as if somebody came in and said, we've really got to boost this in some ways because it's such a downer ending, right? For they were afraid. It's not typically the best way you're going to, promote your religion.
No, not great marketing.
But that's what we've got. And so the other assumption is to say, no, this is exactly what the writer intended. So why in the world would that person want to end it like that? So there's a couple of thoughts.
So in this version, in this telling, there is a young man dressed in a white robe.
Yep.
Who? Because I'm trying not to jump too far, because the way this young man speaks is as if he is not Jesus. But in my head, I'm like, oh, that's Jesus. But then I'm reading it, and I'm going, but he's talking about Jesus.
About Jesus, right?
So who dat?
And he's not described. It says a young man dressed in a white robe. Is this supposed to be an angel? Is it someone who knew Jesus but didn't know the disciple? It's absolutely mysterious. By the way, if you love mystery, this is the one you want.
Okay.
This is the version that you want.
Yeah.
And the versions that you're thinking of, which probably are the ones most associated in most people's minds, are, there are meetings that Jesus has with his disciples afterward. Right. There are breakfasts on the beach in one of them. I mean, Jesus meets with his disciples and gives them a commission to go out into the world and baptize and, teach.
Right.
So we don't get any of that here whatsoever. So this young man, as he's described, is a mystery. He's a messenger. I guess that's the best way to say it.
Okay.
And the other stories, it's more explicit. It'll say they were angels and they were sitting there. Or in one of the versions, he's actually sitting on the stone that was rolled away, as if to kind of dusting off his hands to say, that was that, and there's a little bit of bravado there.
Yeah.
But not here. This person, and I think this is a very important message, but I'll hold that thought for just a second.
Okay. It's interesting too, because in my mind, the Marys, plural,
yes,
are there, and they are the coolest of cool cucumbers. And they're there to tend. I saw, again, on social media, I found this really fascinating person. I'll share with you later. But that Mary Magdalene is acting as a death doula for Jesus, because she's there for so much of it, and that she sort of is there like ushering him through, and that she's there in this sort of supportive role. So I think of her as very composed, I suppose, and then I think of the disciples as being a little panicky in my mind's image of this, and this telling of it is just panic. It's just like, what has happened? Mary, they're in the logistical mode of like, there's a giant rock in our way. How are we going to move the rock?
Right.
Because it seems like it's not a two gal rock. It might be a 4 gal rock.
Right.
And so how are they going to do it? They're kind of thinking it through. They're going to go do their duty. They're going to go tend to Jesus's body, as they have been doing so much, it seems like, up until that point. And then they just kind of panic.
Yeah.
Which is understandable.
Right.
Because they're like, wait, what's happened?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're right. They have the women in this story, in the last section of Jesus' life, the women are kind of the core stability, and they're watching, they're present. They're there through the whole thing. The men disappear. They hide out. They're afraid, all of that. But in this story, they went out and fled from the tomb.
Yeah.
Right? For terror and amazement. It's an interesting combination.
Yeah.
Right? So they're right in the mix of that. Had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. So it's interesting. There's a curious mixture by combining terror and amazement. It's that they're afraid, but there's an element of wonder. And they're amazed at the news. Jesus is alive and at large. But yet there's something about it that's so overwhelming that it's terrifying. I guess the question would be, when have you ever had good news in your life that was so good that it just overwhelmed you?
Yeah.
Right.
Just stopped you.
In my experience over the years, I have seen people, when they've been so relieved, the first thing they do is break down in tears.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
So I think there's a little bit of that going on here. They are maybe enormously relieved, and yet there's something that they comprehend at work here that is daunting.
Yeah.
It's just a fascinating combination.
And it must feel so much bigger than what because they were expecting one thing. They were going to do this thing, and and for all of their belief and for all the strength of their faith, this sort of wild, almost fantastical thing is happening in front of them, and they're just shell shocked. I mean, they're just completely stunned by this. Run away.
So they were told at one point by Jesus, all the disciples, and I think this core group of women as well and other followers, that Jesus had said that he would do exactly what is described here. He would crucify, dead, buried, rise again, go to Galilee. And that's been forgotten.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's like someone tells you these things, and who can hold on to all of that?
A few things have happened in the meantime.
Right? So what part of what's happening here is that it's a way of saying, everything that he told you, it's happening right now.
Yeah.
And that's kind of interesting, because it's like, this is all kind of, I think whoever's crafting this is wanting us to know that the intention that Jesus set out with, it turns out to be on target, that he's following that path that he laid out for himself.
What's the significance of going to Galilee?
So I love this fact, right? Because Galilee is where it all started. And Galilee is where he first began to preach.
Okay.
So in some ways, I think part of it's almost a very simple but very profound message here, is that, you know what, everybody? We reached a dead end here, so start again.
Okay.
And the starting again is another way of talking about the resurrection, right? So it looked like the mission failed. The leader was killed. The disciples ran away. End of story. Hard stop. Except that young man says, go to Galilee. Get back in touch with the thing you got excited about in the first place. And I know sometimes in life, if like you feel like you've gone really adrift and just can't connect with anything, and someone might say to us, well, why'd you get involved in this in the first place? Like, what was it that excited you about playing the organ? What was it that excited you about ministry? What's happened to that? And I think that's what's going on here. And I think it's a message that is unique to this gospel.
Yeah.
The other gospels are all giving us other ways of looking at Easter, which is wonderful. We don't have to choose one.
Yeah.
There's not one right one.
Yeah.
There are actually 4 different, maybe even more than that. But this one, I just love this message, especially in terms of where we are, I think, even as a nation right now. It's a sense that where do we need to reset? How do we need to start again? Where is there an opportunity here, right, to kind of get a sense that we need to begin again? And I think that's what's happening. That's what's going to reorient the disciples going forward. They're going to get that chance to do that.
I feel like that act of starting again can be incredibly challenging.
Enormously so.
It takes a lot of courage, humility,
right,
to be like, well, that didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
That path I thought I was on that was going to lead for the next however long, I was going to be perfect and this and everything was going to go great. And then you kind of go, oh, no.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
And do you start again the same or do you start again differently?
Yeah. Great question.
Change?
I think just to give this a little historical context, the Roman occupants of the country had devastated had essentially flattened the temple.
Okay.
And around the year 65. So what's happening is that this gospel is being written in the aftermath of that destruction.
Okay.
Not only has one of the, perhaps the primary symbol of the religious life been flattened, but you can imagine how people's spirits have been flattened. There was also a rebellion that was smashed. So in the midst of all of that, you have this gospel. And you have people feeling, let's say, very afraid, living in a very fearful environment, and yet feeling amazed somehow, right? That they, even in the midst of that situation, which is about as bad as you can imagine it, they feel like they can start again. Like, go back to Galilee. Get in touch with that. What was it there what was the energy there that made you feel like you wanted to become part of this movement? And the gospel's being written right at the time where you'd think would be the worst possible time in the world to regather a movement. But no, it turns out to be a wonderful time.
So I've heard it phrased as being, reconnecting to your why.
Yes.
Go back to the why.
I think that's a wonderful way of stating this. Yep, that's exactly what they're discovering.
As a place to move forward and start building something again.
And, I think about, when we think about Holy Week, which leads us through the last events of Jesus' life, the last time he eats with his disciples and followers, the crucifixion, all of the depth of that, it does walk us through the worst of what happened. And then along comes this story, which honors that, yet also doesn't stay there.
Okay.
Right? Because what it's doing, it's saying that despite all of the horrors of the whole so-called Holy Week, we're now in a position we're going to have to restart. Which, as you said, it's not something that people necessarily feel like they want to do, but the option is that you lose everything that had been gathered up until this point. So it's recognition of the hardest of the hard things about life, but it's also recognition that that's exactly where God that's exactly where God works, bringing new life out of those really desperate circumstances.
Fantastic. So for those who are listening to this during Holy Week and leading it into Easter, if there's one thing to leave with them today, what would you say?
When you feel like you've lost lost track, go to Galilee. Get in touch with what started it all in the first place and see if you can open up to allow some of that energy in.
I love that. Thank you, Ed. Thank you all so much for listening and joining us this week on Round Hill Radio. Round Hill Radio is brought to you by the friends and members of Round Hill Community Church. For more information, please visit roundhillradio.org.
If you enjoyed this podcast, there are a few things that you can do that would make a big difference to us. Like the video, subscribe if you aren't, and click the notification bell and select all. Thank you.